The day my son, Robert, told me I had to leave his house was the coldest day of my life. I had given him everything, my life savings, my time, and my heart. But none of that mattered the moment his mother-in-law needed my room. My name is Eleanor. I am 68 years old. 3 years ago, after my husband James passed away, I sold our family home. I used $285,000 of that money to pay off Robert's mortgage. I thought I was securing a future where I would never be alone. I was wrong. Very wrong. My son and his wife Jennifer started looking at me like I was a piece of old furniture that no longer fit the decor. They wanted me gone. So, I packed my things. But before I walked out that door, I left a small envelope on the kitchen table. It was a gift they would not understand until it was far too late. Before I tell you about the contents of that envelope and the day the bank called my son, I would love to hear from you. What beautiful city or state are you watching from today? Please let me know in the comments below. The memory of the day I signed that check is still as clear as a bell in my mind. It was 3 years ago, just 6 months after my husband James passed away. We had been married for 42 years. James was my rock, my partner, my everything. When he left this world, the big house we owned in South Carolina felt like a tomb. Every hallway echoed with the silence of a life that was no longer there. My son Robert was the one who suggested the move. He told me, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that big house. Come to Connecticut. Live with us. We have plenty of room and Chloe needs her grandmother." It sounded like a dream. It sounded like the perfect way to spend my golden years. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to see my granddaughter grow up. And most of all, I wanted to feel like I belonged to a family again. So, I sold our family home. It was a beautiful place, filled with 40 years of laughter and memories. I walked away with a significant amount of money. At that time, Robert and his wife, Jennifer, were struggling with their mortgage. They had a beautiful house, but the monthly payments were a heavy burden on them. Robert would often sigh at the dinner table, talking about interest rates and the stress of debt. As a mother, I couldn't stand to see my son struggle. I thought to myself, "Eleanor, you have this money. What good is it doing sitting in a bank account when your own children are stressed?" I decided to do something grand, something I thought would secure my place in their lives forever. I sat down at their kitchen table one sunny afternoon and handed Robert an envelope. Inside was a check for $285,000. It was enough to pay off their mortgage entirely, every single penny. I remember the look on Robert's face. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Jennifer had tears in her eyes. She promised me that this was my home now. She said I would never have to worry about a thing. I felt like a hero. I felt safe. For the first year, it was wonderful. I spent my mornings in the garden, planting hydrangeas and roses. I spent my afternoons playing tea party with little Chloe. I was the one who made the Sunday roasts. I was the one who kept the house smelling like cinnamon and vanilla. I thought I had bought a ticket to a happy ending. I thought that by giving them $285,000, I had ensured I would never be lonely again. But looking back now, I realized that I wasn't joining a family. I was funding a lifestyle. I was a guest who had paid for her stay in advance, and eventually, the management decided they didn't want the guest anymore, only the money she left behind. I called them my golden years, but the gold was only in the check I signed. The reality was starting to turn into cold, hard grey. The change didn't happen overnight. It was slow. It was subtle. It was like a slow leak in a pipe that eventually rots the entire floor. It started with Jennifer's tone of voice. At first, she was so grateful for everything I did. But slowly, her thank you turned into a sigh. Her smiles became forced. I remember the first time I felt like an outsider in the house I had paid for. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen, making a pot of tea. I use a vintage ceramic teapot that belonged to my mother. It's a beautiful piece, with hand-painted blue flowers. Jennifer walked in, looked at the teapot and frowned. She said, "Eleanor, Don't you think the counters are getting a bit cluttered? We really prefer a minimalist look. Maybe you could keep your things in your room. Her words were polite, but her eyes were cold. Cluttered. My mother's teapot was cluttered. I felt a sharp pinch in my chest, but I didn't say anything. I just nodded and carried my tea back to my bedroom. That bedroom was becoming the only place where I felt I could breathe. Then came the comments about the living room. Jennifer would walk through and move the pillows I had fluffed. She would turn off the lamps I had turned on. She started talking about how the house felt crowded. She would say things like, "Chloe is growing so fast. She really needs more space to run around. This house just feels so small lately." Small? The house had 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. It was over 3,000 square feet. It wasn't small. I was just in the way. Robert started changing too. He stopped coming into my room to chat in the evenings. He started avoiding my eyes when Jennifer would make her passive-aggressive remarks. He was caught between his mother and his wife, and I could see him choosing his side. And it wasn't mine. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices were raised. Jennifer said, "Robert, your mother is always just. There. I feel like I can't even have a private conversation in my own home. And Chloe needs a proper playroom. That guest suite would be perfect for her toys." My heart hammered in my chest. The guest suite. That was my room. My room, which was supposed to be my home for the rest of my life. Robert's voice was a whisper. He said, "Jen, she paid off the mortgage. We can't just move her. She gave us $285,000. Jennifer's reply was like ice water down my spine. She said, "That was a gift, Robert. A gift is a gift. It doesn't mean she owns us forever. We need to think about our future. We need to think about Chloe." I stood in the hallway, clutching my sweater around me. I realized then that my sacrifice meant nothing to her. The $285,000 was just a number in the past. To Jennifer, I was no longer a benefactor. I was a burden. I was a tenant who had overstayed her welcome. The cracks were no longer just on the surface. The foundation of my life was beginning to crumble, and I realized, with a terrifying certainty, that the house I paid for was no longer a home. It was a trap. The tension in the house reached a breaking point on a rainy Tuesday in October. I remember the sound of the rain tapping against the window of my bedroom. A rhythmic, lonely sound. That was the day the phone call came. Jennifer's mother, Mrs. Gable, had lost everything. Mrs. Gable was always a woman of expensive tastes. She lived in a high-rise apartment in the city, drove a car she couldn't afford, and wore jewelry that sparkled a little too brightly. We were never close. She looked at me as a simple woman from the South, and I looked at her as someone who was constantly chasing a lifestyle she hadn't earned. The news hit the kitchen like a lightning bolt. Mrs. Gable had filed for bankruptcy. Her apartment was being foreclosed on. She had nowhere to go. I sat at the small breakfast nook, sipping my coffee, as I listened to Jennifer crying on the phone in the next room. Jennifer was frantic. She kept saying, "Mom, don't worry. We won't let you end up on the street. We will figure something out." I felt a chill go down my spine. I knew, in my heart, I knew what that something was going to be. The house was already feeling small to Jennifer. She had been complaining about space for months. And now, her mother was homeless. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted. I became invisible. Robert and Jennifer would have long, whispered conversations in their bedroom. They would stop talking the moment I entered the room. Even little Chloe seemed to sense the change. She didn't come to my room to hear stories anymore. She spent all her time with Jennifer, who was busy looking at furniture catalogues for guest rooms. I felt like a ghost haunting my own hallways. I was the woman who had handed over $285,000 to save this family from debt. I was the woman who kept the laundry folded and the floors swept. But to Jennifer, I was just an obstacle. I was the person occupying the space her mother needed. Mrs. Gable's situation was a tragedy, But Jennifer was using it as an opportunity. She started making more comments about my safety. She would say things like, "Eleanor, those stairs look so steep for you lately. I worry about you being all alone on this side of the house." I wasn't alone. I was with my family. Or at least, that is what I kept telling myself. But the isolation was growing. I was being pushed to the margins. I was being treated like a problem that needed a solution. And the solution they were building was a betrayal I never saw coming. I was the one who paid for the roof over their heads. I was the one who gave them financial freedom. And yet, I was the one they were planning to replace. The uninvited guest wasn't Mrs. Gable in their eyes. The uninvited guest was me. Sunday dinner used to be my favorite time of the week. It was a time for roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and family stories. But that Sunday evening, the air felt heavy. It felt like the air before a massive storm. Robert was quiet. He barely touched his food. Jennifer was overly polite, which was always a bad sign. She kept asking if I wanted more water or if the chicken was too dry. It was the kind of kindness people show you right before they deliver bad news. After Chloe was put to bed, Robert asked if we could talk in my room. He looked tired. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. He sat on the edge of my armchair, while Jennifer stood by the door, like a guard. "Mom," Robert started. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He looked at the family photo on my nightstand instead. "Jennifer and I have been talking. Mrs. Gable is in a really bad spot. She is not doing well, Mom. She needs a lot of support right now." I stayed quiet. I wanted him to say it. I wanted him to find the courage to say the words out loud. He continued, his voice shaking just a little bit. "We've been looking into some options for you. There is a beautiful senior living community downtown, the Harbor Lights. It's right near the park. They have a garden, a library, and people your age to socialize with. We think it would be a much better fit for you." The words felt like a slap in the face. Senior living, community, downtown. They were all just polite words for get out. "Robert," I said, my voice remarkably calm, "I paid for this house. I put $285,000 into this property so we could all be together. You can't just throw me out." Jennifer stepped forward then. Her voice was sharp, like a knife. "It's not throwing you out, Eleanor. It's just rearranging. My mother has nowhere else to go. She is family. This house is just too crowded. And Chloe needs her own space too. You'll be much happier there. You won't have to worry about the stairs or the cooking." I looked at my son. My only son. The boy I had raised. The man I had supported through every mistake he ever made. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say, "No, Jennifer, my mother stays here." But Robert just nodded. He whispered, "It's for the best, Mom. It's for the family." In that moment, I realized that I didn't have a son anymore. I had a stranger sitting in my room. He was willing to trade the woman who gave him life for the convenience of his wife's mother. He was willing to ignore the $285,000 I had sacrificed, so he could keep his pride. "Just rearranging," I repeated. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I realized that if I had to fight to be loved in my own home, then it wasn't a home worth staying in. But I also knew something they didn't. I knew that respect is earned, and so is a roof over your head. They thought I was a weak, old woman who would just go quietly into the night. They thought my gift was theirs to keep forever. They were wrong. As I sat there, watching them leave my room with looks of relief on their faces, I began to plan. If they wanted to treat our relationship like a business arrangement, then I would show them exactly how business is done. That Sunday night, after Robert and Jennifer left my room, I didn't cry. I sat in my armchair for a long time, watching the moon move across the sky. For years, I had been the mother who provided. I had been the wife who supported. I had been the grandmother who cared. But in that one conversation, I realized I had become something else to them. I had become an obstacle, a square foot of space that they wanted to reclaim. I looked at the framed photo of my husband, James, on my dresser. James had been a financial lawyer for nearly 40 years. He was a man who believed in love, but he also believed in fine print. He used to tell me, Eleanor, hope for the best, but always, always document the truth. When I sold our home and decided to give Robert that $285,000, James had already passed away. But his voice was still in my head. He had taught me well. I remembered the day at the lawyer's office 3 years ago. Robert thought I was just signing a simple gift letter for the bank. He was so excited about being debt-free that he didn't really read what I was signing. He just saw the dollar signs. But I had insisted on a very specific clause. I had recorded that $285,000 as a private loan, secured by a lien against the property. At the time, I did it because James's voice told me to. I never thought I would actually use it. I thought it was just a formality, a bit of just-in-case paperwork. I wanted to believe my son would always love me. I wanted to believe I would always have a place here. But as I sat in the dark that night, I realized that my kindness had been taken for weakness. Jennifer thought the money was a gift that came with no strings attached. She thought she could take the gold and throw away the person who gave it to her. A new feeling began to stir inside me. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, sharp clarity. It was the realization that I was the one with the power. I had been playing the role of the sweet, quiet grandmother for so long that they forgot I was also the woman who managed a law firm's books for 3 decades. I decided then that I would not be a victim. I would not go to that senior living facility downtown and spend my days playing bingo while they enjoyed the house I bought. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, then I would treat them like a business associate who had defaulted on a contract. I wasn't just Eleanor, the mother. I was Eleanor, the lien holder. And it was time to collect. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to be quiet. I would let them think they had won. I would let them think I was defeated. Because the best weapon is the one your opponent doesn't even know you are holding. The next 3 days were the strangest days of my life. I woke up every morning and acted as if everything was normal. I made my tea. I played with Chloe. I even smiled at Jennifer when she started measuring my room for her mother's new curtains. It was painful to watch her. She was so happy. She was already mentally moving me out. She didn't even notice that I was quietly moving my most precious items into my car. I took my jewelry, my mother's old teapot, and the legal files James had left me. Robert was a different story. He couldn't look at me. He was riddled with guilt, but he was too weak to stand up to his wife. Every time he saw me, he would find an excuse to leave the room. He was waiting for the problem to go away. He was waiting for me to be gone so he wouldn't have to feel like a bad son anymore. On Tuesday morning, while they were both at work, I went to a small apartment complex about 20 minutes away. It was a quiet building with a lot of light and a small balcony. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. I signed the lease and paid the first 6 months in advance. As I held the new keys in my hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't being evicted. I was being liberated. That afternoon, I visited my lawyer. His name is David, and he was a junior partner at James's old firm. He looked at the documents I brought him, the documents Robert had signed 3 years ago. David shook his head and said, "Eleanor, you were very smart to keep this. This lien is perfectly valid. Since the property is no longer serving as your primary residence due to their actions, you have every right to demand repayment of the loan." I told him to start the paperwork. I told him to be ready. The last night in the house was Tuesday. I sat at the dinner table and listened to Jennifer talk about all the changes she was going to make to her house once I was settled in the facility. She talked about new paint colors. She talked about a new rug. She didn't realize that in 48 hours she wouldn't have a house to decorate. I felt a pang of sadness for Robert. I really did. But then I remembered the way he looked at his shoes when he told me I had to leave. I remembered the way he let his wife call me clutter. On Wednesday morning, while the house was empty, I finished packing. I left the house clean. I left the floors shining. I wanted them to remember me as the woman who gave them everything. And then I sat at the kitchen table. I placed a single white envelope in the center of the table. Inside was a copy of the recorded lien and a formal letter from my lawyer. It was the gift I had mentioned, a gift that informed them they had 30 days to pay me $285,000, or the house would go into foreclosure. I walked out the door and didn't look back. I didn't feel like a 68-year-old woman who had lost her home. I felt like a woman who had finally found her worth. I drove to my new apartment, sat on my small balcony, and waited for the phone to ring. I knew it wouldn't be long. Wednesday morning arrived with a stillness that I had not felt in years. It was the kind of morning where the world seemed to hold its breath. Robert and Jennifer had already left for work, and Chloe was at her preschool. The house was empty. For the first time in 3 years, it truly felt like I was alone. I took one last walk through the rooms. I looked at the kitchen, the place where I had cooked hundreds of meals for a family that eventually decided I was an inconvenience. I looked at the living room, where I had sat quietly in the corner, trying to be invisible so I wouldn't clutter their minimalist life. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I went to my room and picked up my final suitcase. I had already moved my most important things over the last few days. My jewelry, my photos of James, and my mother's teapot were already safe in my new apartment. All that was left in this room was a bed I didn't own and a set of curtains I didn't choose. I walked into the kitchen and stood by the island. I reached into my purse and pulled out 2 things. The first was my set of house keys. I placed them gently on the cold granite. The second was a thick, white, legal envelope. I had spent the night before writing a short note to go with the legal documents. I didn't write about my hurt. I didn't write about the $285,000. I simply wrote, "I have decided to follow your advice and rearrange my life. I hope you find the space you were looking for." I placed the envelope right next to the keys. It looked so small and innocent sitting there, but I knew it was a legal bomb. It was a formal notice of a private loan and a recorded lien. It was the paperwork that proved the house didn't belong just to them. It belonged to the person who paid for it. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me one last time. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove toward my new life. My new apartment was small, but it was filled with light. There was no Jennifer to tell me where to put my teapot. There was no Robert to avoid my gaze. I spent the afternoon unpacking my things. I put my books on the shelves. I hung my favorite paintings. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't a guest. I was the mistress of my own domain. That night, I sat on my balcony and watched the sunset. I felt a peace that I had forgotten existed. I realized that the silence wasn't lonely. The silence was freedom. I had left the keys and the envelope behind, and with them, I had left the burden of being an unwanted mother. I knew the storm was coming. I knew that once they opened that envelope, their world would change. But as I sipped my tea, I realized I wasn't afraid. I had played by their rules for 3 years. Now, it was time to play by mine. A week passed in beautiful, quiet bliss. I had turned off my phone for the first few days. I wanted to enjoy my new home without the sound of their excuses. I went for walks in the park. I joined a local book club. I started to feel like Eleanor again, not just grandma or the mother-in-law. But on Monday morning, I knew it was time. I turned my phone back on. It didn't take long. Less than 10 minutes later, it started ringing. The screen showed Robert's name. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Hello, Robert," I said. My voice was as steady as a rock. "Mom? Mom? Where are you?" Robert's voice was frantic. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. "We went to your room a week ago, and you were gone. Why didn't you go to the Harbor Lights facility? We've been calling everyone." I took a slow breath. I decided that facility wasn't the right fit for me. Robert, I found a lovely apartment of my own. An apartment? With what money? He paused, and I could hear his voice trembling. Mom, I just got off the phone with the bank. And our lawyer. What is this? This lien? They said the house is being flagged for foreclosure. They said we owe you $285,000. That is correct. Robert, I replied calmly, when I paid off your mortgage 3 years ago, I didn't give you a gift. I provided a private loan secured by the property. Your father taught me never to leave my future to chance. You both signed the paperwork. I suppose you were just too excited about the money to read the fine print. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. I could almost hear his brain trying to process the news. But Mom, he finally shouted, we thought that was a gift. Jennifer is already moving her mother's furniture into your old room. We can't owe you $285,000. We don't have that kind of money. We spent everything on the new renovations and the car. That is a shame. Robert, I said, but the legal document is very clear. Since the house is no longer my primary residence, and since you have breached our verbal agreement of a lifelong home, the loan is now due in full. You have 30 days to pay me back. If not, the bank will proceed with the foreclosure to satisfy my lien. You can't do this to us. Robert began to beg. Jennifer is stressed. Chloe is confused. And Mrs. Gable has nowhere else to go. You're our mother. You're supposed to help us. I felt a flash of cold fire in my heart. I did help you, Robert. I gave you $285,000. I gave you 3 years of my life. I gave you my own home. And in return, you gave my room to a woman who hasn't contributed a single penny to your life. Just because your wife thought I was clutter. Mom, please. I am sorry. Robert, I interrupted him. But as you told me last week, it is just rearranging. I am rearranging my assets to ensure my own security. Since I am no longer part of your family home, I would like my investment back. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. But not from fear. It was from the sheer weight of the truth. Robert had forgotten that I was a person with rights. He had seen me only as a bank account. Now he was realizing that the bank account was closed. And the bill was finally due. The silence in my new apartment was a gift. It was a silence I had earned through years of hard work and months of being made to feel small. But on the third day after I left that white envelope on the kitchen table, the silence was broken. My phone began to ring. It vibrated against the wooden coffee table with a persistence that told me exactly who was on the other end. It was Robert. I let it ring. I sat there, watching the screen light up, thinking about all the times I had waited for him to call, just to say hello. Now, he was calling because the foundation of his life was shaking. Finally, I picked it up. Robert did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. His voice was a jagged mess of panic and anger. He told me that he had spent the morning with a lawyer. He told me that Jennifer was in hysterics. He said that the bank had confirmed everything. The lien was real. The debt was real. And the 30-day deadline was very, very real. Mom, please, he gasped. He sounded like a man who had been running for miles. We checked our accounts. We don't have the money. We spent nearly $60,000 on the kitchen remodel. We bought the new car. We took that trip to Aspen. We don't have $285,000 just sitting around. I stayed quiet. I let his words hang in the air. I remembered how Jennifer had bragged about the new quartz countertops. The ones she said made the house look more modern. Those countertops were paid for with the money I had saved for my old age. I know you don't have it. Robert, I said softly. That is why the house must be sold. The equity in that property belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. Then, he tried the one thing he thought would break me. He used his last card. Mom, you can't do this, he whispered. There is something we haven't told you yet. We were waiting for the right time, for the house to be settled. Jennifer is pregnant. We are having another baby. Chloe's going to be a big sister. I felt a sharp, cold pinch in my heart. A new grandchild. A new life. In any other year, in any other world, I would have dropped everything. I would have torn up the legal papers and moved into a closet just to make sure that the baby was safe. Robert knew this. He was counting on my motherly instinct to override my sense of justice. But as I sat in my quiet apartment, looking at my mother's teapot, I realized something. A baby was coming into a house where the grandmother was treated like trash. What kind of life would that be? What kind of lesson would that child learn? A baby, I repeated. The word felt heavy. Yes. Mom! A baby. Robert's voice rose with a false sense of hope. You wouldn't put your own unborn grandchild out on the street, would you? Think about Chloe. Think about the family. We need you to withdraw the lien. We need you to let this go. I took a long, slow breath. I thought about the night Robert sat in my room and looked at his shoes. I thought about the way he let his wife tell me I was cluttered. Robert, I said, and my voice was as steady as a mountain. I am happy for the new life you are bringing into the world. I truly am. But a baby does not change the truth. A baby does not pay a debt. And a baby does not give you the right to steal my security. Mom! How can you be so heartless? He screamed. I could hear Jennifer crying in the background, a loud, performative sob that I knew was meant for my ears. I am not being heartless. Robert, I replied, I am simply doing exactly what you suggested. Do you remember what you told me? You said that moving me out of my home, the home I paid for, was just rearranging. You said Jennifer needed her mother close, and that required some rearranging. I paused for a moment, letting the irony sink in. Well, now it is my turn. I am rearranging my assets. I am rearranging my life to ensure that I am never again in a position where I have to beg for a room. I am rearranging things so that I have the $285,000 that belongs to me. If that means you have to find a smaller house, then that is just part of the process. We will have nowhere to go, Robert cried. You have Jennifer's mother, I reminded him. The woman you chose over me. Mrs. Gable is already living in my room. Isn't she? I am sure she will be happy to help you find a 2-bedroom apartment. It might be a bit crowded, but I am sure you can just rearrange until it works. Robert started to beg then. He promised things he couldn't keep. He promised that I could come back. He promised that Jennifer would apologize. But I knew the truth. They didn't want me. They wanted my money. They wanted the roof I put over their heads. But they didn't want the woman who provided it. The 30 days are counting down. Robert, I said, I suggest you call a real estate agent. It is time to face the weight of your own choices. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel happy. It is never happy to see your own child suffer. But I did feel right. I felt a sense of balance that had been missing for 3 long years. I had spent my life protecting Robert from the consequences of his mistakes. But this time, the mistake was too big. This time, he had to learn that the person who loves you the most is often the one you should fear losing the most. I put my phone on silent and walked to my window. The world outside was busy and loud and full of people making choices. But inside my home, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. I had rearranged my life. And for the first time, the view was beautiful. The finality of a legal document is a powerful thing. Robert and Jennifer tried every trick in the book to avoid the inevitable. They tried to get a second mortgage, but their credit was already stretched too thin from their luxury spending. They tried to find a private lender, but no one was willing to step into the middle of a family feud with a recorded lien on the property. 30 days. That was all the time they had. And when day 30 arrived, and the money was not in my account, the foreclosure process moved forward like a heavy, unstoppable train. My lawyer, David, was professional and firm. He made sure that every legal requirement was met. In the end, they had no choice. They had to put the house on the market for a quick cash sale. I remember the day the house sold. It was a beautiful afternoon in late spring. The house was sold for much less than it was worth, because they were desperate. After the primary bank was paid, and the closing costs were settled, every single penny of my $285,000 was returned to me, plus interest. I sat at my new kitchen table and looked at the digital balance in my bank account. $285,000. It was more than just a number. It was my freedom. It was the life James and I had built together, returned to me by the hands of the person who tried to steal it. But for Robert and Jennifer, the reality was very different. After my lien was satisfied, there was almost nothing left for them. They had lost the equity they had built over the years. They had lost their credit rating. And most importantly, they had lost their home. They had to move out on a rainy Saturday. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it from a neighbor. They didn't move into another big house in a fancy neighborhood. They moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It was an old building with peeling paint and a noisy radiator. Jennifer's mother, Mrs. Gable, had to move with them because they only had 2 bedrooms, one for Robert and Jennifer, and one for Chloe and the new baby, Mrs. Gable had to sleep on apple-out sofa in the tiny living room. The irony was not lost on me. Jennifer had complained that I was cluttering her house. She had pushed me out so her mother could have my room. And now, she was living in a space so small that she couldn't even close the door for a moment of privacy. Her mother wasn't just close. Her mother was literally in the middle of her living room, every single day, and every single night. I heard that the tension in that apartment is unbearable. Robert is working 2 jobs to try to pay the rent and the legal fees. Jennifer is stressed and unhappy. They lost the lifestyle they had built on my back. They had tried to trade a mother's love for a piece of real estate, and they ended up with neither. And what about me? I didn't stay in that small apartment for long. I realized that for 68 years, I had been living for other people. I had been a daughter, a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. I had always been someone's someone. It was time to just be Eleanor. I used a portion of my money to buy a beautiful, small condo by the ocean. It has a balcony where I can see the waves every morning. But I don't spend all my time there. I decided to see the things James and I always talked about but never did. I took a cruise through the Mediterranean. I walked through the ancient ruins in Greece. I drank wine in a small village in Italy. I saw the lights of Paris from the top of the Eiffel Tower. I made friends from all over the world, people who see me as a vibrant, independent woman, not a piece of furniture to be rearranged. I still have a relationship with Chloe. I make sure she has everything she needs. But I do it through a trust fund that Robert cannot touch. I want her to know that her grandmother loves her, but I also want her to see a woman who stands up for herself. My son, Robert, still calls me. His voice is different now. It is humble. Sometimes it is full of regret. He tells me how hard things are. He tells me he misses the old house. I listen, and I offer him my prayers. But I do not offer him my money. I have learned a hard, valuable lesson in my golden years. I have learned that you cannot buy love, and you should never let someone else define your worth. I am Eleanor. I am 68 years old. I am a world traveler, and I am finally, truly, at peace. Sometimes, the best way to save a family is to let it break. Sometimes, the only way to find your home is to be thrown out of it. I am not the woman I was 3 years ago. I am stronger. I am wiser. And I know that as long as I have my self-respect, I will never be alone. As I sit here today, watching the sun dip below the horizon of the Atlantic Ocean, I find myself thinking about the word family. For a long time, I thought family meant giving until you have nothing left. I thought it meant staying quiet even when you are being treated like a piece of old furniture. But I was wrong. I am 68 years old, and I have finally learned that respect is not something that is given for free. It is something that is earned, and it is something that must be protected with strong boundaries. My son Robert and his wife Jennifer thought that my kindness was a weakness. They thought that because I loved them, I would allow them to take my home and my dignity. They forgot that I am a woman who lived through 40 years of life with a man like James. They forgot that I am capable, I am strong, and I am worthy of a life that is filled with more than just a spare room and a minimalist decor. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Never be afraid to protect yourself. Your golden years should be gold, not grey. Whether it is a legal document, a private loan, or simply the courage to say no, you must be the one to guard your own peace. I got my $285,000 back, but more importantly, I got my spirit back. I am no longer waiting for a phone call that never comes. I am no longer walking on eggshells in a house where I am not wanted. I am free. Before I go, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had to stand your ground with your own family? Have you ever had to set a boundary that felt difficult, but was necessary for your own well-being? Please share your thoughts and your stories in the comments below. We are a community, and our voices deserve to be heard. If you found value in my journey, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us share more voices and more lessons of justice and life. Note, while this story was crafted for your entertainment, the message regarding family boundaries and protecting your financial security is very real and very important. This is not legal or financial advice, but it is a reminder to always value yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I am Eleanor, and I am finally home. May your days be filled with respect, and may your heart always find its way to peace. Goodbye for now.